I was recently down in Florida, and when I was there, I ended up getting to go to the most magical place on the earth. The place where if you will wish upon a star, your dreams really will come true. It'll be up on the screen, but I got to go to the Magic Kingdom. Now, I know we have a lot of Disney fans in the room, especially Wesley and Abby, Bradley, Letty, pretty much our whole staff. But the Magic Kingdom, of course, is part of Walt Disney. And the castle itself is the centerpiece, one of the centerpieces of the company. I've actually been in Germany and seen the castle that this is actually modeled after. It's actually pretty cool. But the castle represents the Disney experience, enchantment, the miraculous, the place where your dreams will finally all come true. For a lot of people, Disney World is the place of enchantment. It's the place where you can experience the miraculous, the place where you can have all of your dreams come true. Now, I just have to say, I have nothing against Mickey Mouse. I have nothing against Pluto or even Disney adults, but there was just something in the air there where a lot of people were living in the magic. They were totally living in the moment, like they were totally living in something not real. Now, personally, I think I can't be seduced by the mouse. I actually like my reality, nothing against his reality, but I didn't feel myself getting sucked into the drug while I was down there. I was too stuck living in reality. When I go to parks like this, I'm constantly thinking about how does this work? How do things work? And so I was finding myself asking questions like, how much do these fireworks cost? Or how do they put this ride together? How do they pull off this special effect? I was skeptical, I think too skeptical to let the mouse come into my heart and take over. Now, even though I didn't get sucked in, it was a great experience. Remembering the fireworks going off in the night sky and sitting in the cart in the haunted mansion and the little ghost suddenly appearing in the cart and seeing robots from the future singing and dancing, you almost feel like you're in the land of the miraculous, like you're in the land of magic. Now, most of you know where I'm going with this, but I mention all this morning because this morning we're seeing up close and personal something actually miraculous. It's not going to be a special effect. It's not going to be a ride. It's not going to be fireworks. But this morning, we're going to see in this passage Jesus Christ actually doing the miraculous. We're going to see him in reality actually doing the impossible and healing someone. And what we'll see as a result of this miracle will be true faith. The miracle itself will lead to true faith in Jesus Christ, true trust in him, that he is in control, that he is indeed who he says he is, and that he is Lord. Our passage this morning is what's often called the second sign passage in the Gospel of John, the second sign passage of the Gospel of John. John actually tells us why he's writing this gospel. And at the end of the gospel, at the end of this whole thing, it's going to be up on the screen, he says this in chapter 20. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. John calls all the miraculous things that Jesus did signs. He calls them signs because he says that the miracles that Jesus has done and that he's doing are meant to point us to something. They're meant to actually lead us to faith in him, a trust in him, a true faith that believes he is sufficient. It's not just fireworks for the sake of fireworks. It's not just miracles for the sake of feeling good. It's fireworks, it's miracles that lead us to trust in him, to rest in him, to be still, and to know that he is God. You remember a few weeks ago, we saw the first sign at a wedding. It was a happy time. Jesus turns water into wine. But now this morning, it's a more gloomy day. But in just a moment, he's about to turn sickness into health. It's a good reminder that in this life, we will have joy and we'll have sorrow. You'll have weddings and you'll have funerals. But the presence of God, the presence of Jesus Christ is going to make a difference in both. He's the one you want at the party, and he's also the one you want in your pain. My main idea is going to be up on the screen. It's really going to flow from the passage, and it's this. Have faith in Jesus Christ. Have faith in Jesus Christ. The purpose of this sign, the purpose of this miracle is that we would have faith in Jesus Christ. Maybe for the first time this morning, or maybe a renewed faith in him, that we would have a true faith in Jesus Christ. And what God intends to show us in this passage is how that faith can start, how that faith can progress, and ultimately how it can land. My points are also going to be up on the screen. They're going to flow from this passage, and they're this. Number one, true faith involves reason. We'll see that in 2 verses. True faith trusts God at his word, verses 48 through 50. And then finally, true faith rests in Jesus Christ. True faith involves reason. True faith trusts God in his word. True faith rests in Jesus Christ. The passage actually illustrates the progression of faith, the progression of what it looks like to have a faith relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, before we dive into the first point, you'll remember that over the last few weeks, Jesus is on the move. There's been a growing tension with a religious group called the Pharisees. The Pharisees are essentially a Jewish religious group. They're respected, they're smart, they're in charge, they're successful. The Pharisees have essentially been watching Jesus, and they've been critiquing him. They've been kind of finding things they don't like about him. And so Jesus has now moved his base of operations. He's heading from the southern region, which is Judea, down south, up to Galilee, which is up north, which is actually where he's from. And as he's heading back, he knows that it could be a chilly reception because this is where he grew up. They would have been familiar with him as a kid. They might have been skeptical of who he's now claiming to be. He even says in the Gospels often, a prophet has no honor in his hometown. Yet as he heads back into Galilee, there's actually something that's really interesting that happens. He gets to his hometown region and they actually all welcome him. It's a warm reception, verse 45. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast. For they too had gone to the feast. So he gets to his hometown region and he gets a warm welcome. Why? Well, because they had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem. They had seen some of his miracles. They had heard some of his teachings. They had seen him do amazing things, and so they're happy to see him. But what we're going to find out is Jesus is going to want more for them than them just being happy to see him. He's after their faith in him. He's after their trust in him. And he's about to do something that's going to show that. And this really brings us to our first point this morning. True faith involves reason. Verse 46. So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. So he gets to the region of Galilee and he makes his way to the town of Cana. It's about 40 to 60 miles from where he was. And we're told that there's this official from Capernaum, which is a town about 20 miles east from Cana. And his son, the text says, is sick. Now, this official, maybe he's an administrator, maybe he's an officer, we're not really sure. But it's likely he's in service to King Herod. But we really don't know much about him. Maybe he's not named because he has a high public profile. But he's likely very powerful, he's likely very wealthy, and yet his kid is sick. The human condition is breaking through in this guy's life. Verse 47. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So this official, probably high salary, high command, public-facing life. If he needs something, he'll click on the app. If he needs something, he'll shoot off an email. He'll text his assistants to get it done. But here he's come himself. His kid is sick. And not just a little bit, but a lot. Near to the point of death. He's out of options. He's powerless. He's desperate. But notice he's heard about Jesus. At this point, it's rumored that Jesus can do miraculous things. It's rumored that he's someone special. The official, he's heard these things. He's thought through these things. He's begun to weigh these things, and he's heard that Jesus is in town. And so he reasons, I think he can help. And so he goes. He seeks out Jesus, and he asks him to come to Capernaum, 20 miles east, to heal his son. Now, the official didn't know this, but this is actually really the first step to true faith. This is how true faith begins. It begins by hearing something about Jesus. You hear that he's this or he's that he can do this or that. You sense that he's able to meet some kind of need in you. And then using your reason, using your mind, you start thinking through these things. And as a result, you come to him. The official heard some things about Jesus. He thought through those things. And he begins to think, I think he can help. And so he comes. He's not necessarily coming for salvation. He's not necessarily coming for a relationship with God, but because he has a need. And he believes that need can be met through Jesus. This is actually how true faith begins. You hear something about Jesus. By God's grace, you start to think about these things. You weigh these things, and you realize, I think he can help. And as a result, you come to him. It may not be very strong. It may not be very selfless, but it's something. It's a step. And this is, of course, how a lot of us in this room came to Jesus Christ. We had a need. We were out of options. We were powerless. We were desperate. And we reasoned maybe God can help. And we began to come. True faith starts with, it involves reason. It involves considering the things we hear, evidence about Jesus, hearing the testimony about Jesus, and coming to him, seeking him and asking him. But also notice true faith involves trusting God at his word. Point 2, trusting God at his word. The official is coming to Jesus because he has a need. He feels like his deepest need is for his son to be okay. It's understandable. He's not there seeking salvation. He's not there seeking of a relationship with God. He's not aware of any of that. He's there because he has a need. And he believes that need can be met by Jesus. But notice Jesus' response. Verse 48. Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. What? What's he saying? Why is Jesus' answer to please heal my son, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe? Well, in the original Greek, it's actually a little bit clearer what he's saying here. The you is actually plural. So what Jesus is actually saying is something more like, unless you people see signs and wonders, you won't believe. He says to this official, he says, unless you all see signs and wonders, you won't believe. It's a bit of a critique. A rebuke, we might say. He's saying with some level of disappointment, it seems like the only way you'll all believe is if there's some miraculous things that happen right in front of your eyes. He's saying with some disappointment in himself, he's saying it seems like the only way you'll all believe is if there's signs and wonders happening in front of you. What is Jesus doing here? Well, he's getting to something really deep. He's getting at the kind of faith that he's looking for. And the kind of faith he's looking for is a faith that takes him at his word. A faith that isn't just based on the fireworks, but is based on who he is, what he said, what he'll do, and ultimately what he has done. It's a faith that takes him at his word. Jesus is essentially setting up this official for a challenge. The challenge will be, will you trust me? Even without seeing the proof? Yes or no? Will you trust me? Even without seeing the proof? Yes or no? Now, in the immediate context, this has to do with, will you trust me to heal your son? But the bigger, more deeper thing that God's teaching us here is something about the nature of faith, of true faith. The official doesn't know it yet, but Jesus doesn't just want to heal his son. He wants to spiritually heal his entire family. And what Jesus wants most for this official is for him to have a true faith in him, a true trust in him, a salvation in him. And that type of faith comes by trusting in his word, taking God at his word, not putting your faith just in miracles, but putting your faith in the one that God has raised from the dead. This official's come to Jesus with a need, a real need, but Jesus wants to take him further. This official's come to Jesus with earthly desperation, but Jesus wants to take him and heal him at the deepest level. The official comes to Jesus. His primary goal is, my son needs to be healed. It's understandable. But Jesus comes to the official, and his primary goal is, you need to believe. You need a true trust, a true faith in me. So this official, he comes to Jesus. He says, please, will you heal my son? And Jesus takes this moment to teach. He says, will you trust me, even without seeing how it all works? Will you take me at my word? Because that's going to be the most important thing. But notice this passage goes on. The official's not letting up. Verse 49, sir, come down before my child dies. He doesn't really fully get what Jesus has just said. He's got a sick kid. He thinks this guy, Jesus, he's the solution. So let's go. Come, heal him. Life will be good again. I can live for the good. I can live a worry-free life. Notice how Jesus responds. He's going to give this official both a word and a challenge. He says in verse 50, go, your son will live. Go, your son will live. In other words, Jesus says, I'm not coming with you, but your son, he's going to live. Now, this, of course, would have been unthinkable because divine healing always would come through the presence of the person. But here Jesus is saying the way that you think this miracle is supposed to happen is not how it's actually going to happen. He says, I'm going to heal him, but it's not the way you think it's going to go down. Will you trust me? Jesus wants him to take him at his word. He wants us to take him at his word. And notice verse 50, by the grace of God, he does. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. Now, reason might be the beginning of true faith, but by God's grace, true faith is when you take Jesus at his word. You believe who he says he is. You believe who he says you are. You trust what God has done for you. That on the cross, he's removed your sin. He's taken your guilt. He's taken your shame. And in his resurrection, new life can flow through you. By the power of God's Spirit, you can take God at his word. You can believe him this morning, that he can meet the greatest need you have in himself by his power. This passage continues, and we really see our final point this morning. True faith rests in Jesus Christ. Verse 51, as he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them that hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. This official trusts Jesus at his word, and he heads back. And as he's headed back, his servants here, they meet him. They're excited. They know that what they're going to tell him will matter to him. It's been crushing him for months. And they say to him, your son's getting better. Your son is recovering. And the official in this moment is probably so happy. He's probably so relieved. But now the most important question ever forms in his heart. His chest and his heart starts beating. And he begins to think, who was I talking to? Because he knows Jesus is the one who did this. But he checks just to make sure. He says to his servants, when? When did he start getting better? He already knows the answer. And so they tell him, well, we know the fever left at around the 7th hour. And at that moment, his whole world changes. That moment when Jesus starts replaying in his mind. That exact moment when he told him, your son will live. That exact moment when he told him, the kind of faith I'm looking for is a faith that would take me at my word. And in that moment, he realizes that the person he was talking to is greater than the stars. He's greater than life and death, greater than sickness and greater than health. And the passage says he believes. His whole household believes. Not just that Jesus could heal their son or their brother, but that Jesus himself is the Son of God, the Messiah who has come to make all things new, the one who truly shows us our need and meets our need by his power and his own life. And this morning, true faith finds its rest. It finds its hope. It finds its peace in Jesus Christ. Reason might be the beginning of faith. And by God's grace, true faith starts when you take Jesus at his word. But salvation, our greatest need being met, comes by resting in the person and in the work of Jesus Christ. Trust him this morning. When you come to Jesus, you'll get much more than surface level help. You'll get help at the deepest possible level. When you trust him, when you come to him, when you take him at your word, at his word. This morning, perhaps some of us have great sadness in our lives. It could be a sickness in your own life, perhaps somebody else's life, a broken relationship, something you can't shake this morning. We do believe in miracles here at King's Church, and we pray they'd happen. We encourage you to pray that they would happen. God is still in the business of healing and changing circumstances. But it's also really important to say this morning that on this side of glory, not every sickness will be healed. That's never promised. Jesus gave a specific promise to a specific guy. Paul prayed and prayed and prayed that the thorn in his flesh would be removed. And God says, no, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. The good news of the gospel this morning is that God knows your pain firsthand because he's been through it himself. Nothing you're experiencing, nothing that you will experience is something that he hasn't experienced in a similar way. And ultimately, the gospel is that God himself suffered to end evil in this world so that we would not be ended. And now redemption is our story. Redemption is the fact that God will use every speck of evil one day to do exactly the opposite of what was intended. Every sickness, every pain, every trial can be transformed into something purposeful, something meaningful through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Paul says in Romans 8:28, God is working out all things for the good of those who love him and who've been called according to his purpose, which means our God is so good this morning. And he's so committed to our good that he's taking all our things, our good things, our bad things, and he's up to something with them. He's taking all of it, our pain, our pleasure, our waiting, our setbacks, our losses, our joys. And in the grand scheme of things, he's making it serve a purpose to bring good in our lives. And what is that good? Well, according to the Bible, it's that we would be made like Jesus Christ. That's the very goal of faith, that we would be made like him. Said another way, God doesn't promise you better life circumstances if you love him this morning. He promises you a better life. God doesn't just promise you better circumstances if you love him this morning. He promises you a better life. Jesus did a miracle in this family's lives, but the greatest miracle in this family's lives was that they met him through it. Even though they eventually all passed away, even though they eventually all died, through this event, they learned the true meaning of faith, to trust him at his word, to rest in his power. Today, you can do that, perhaps, if you've never come to faith in Jesus Christ. You can take him at his word. You can believe that he can meet a deep need in you, and that ultimately you can find rest in him.